Everyone has heard of Osiris, Isis, and Anubis. But what if I told you that before them, there were gods so ancient that even the Egyptians themselves preferred to forget? Gods who didn't rule the underworld, but the nothingness. Figures so primitive and mysterious that history tried to erase. When we think of Egyptian religion, we immediately imagine great temples, mummies, and pyramids. But the first Egyptian cults emerged long before these wonders. We are talking about more than 5,000 years ago, a time when the gods did not have human faces. They were raw forces of nature. The first beliefs arose back in the pre-dynastic period, between 5,500 and 3,100 BC. And the most curious part, most of the names of these gods are not in the pyramids. They were forgotten. The oldest records are the so-called pyramid texts, found in tombs from the 5th and 6th dynasties. There, the priests spoke of deities that were no longer worshipped. In other words, even back then, these gods were already being erased from memory. Nu, also called Nun, was the original chaos. He was not a god with a human form. He was the eternal ocean that existed before everything else. In the Egyptian view, before the earth, before the light, there was only Nu, infinite and silent waters. But these waters were not empty. They contained the potential for all creation. In Egyptian iconography, Nu was sometimes represented as a kneeling man with rippling water above his head, symbolizing his absolute dominion over the liquid chaos. His role was so essential that, even when erased as a worshipped deity, his name still appeared in rituals related to purification. Nu was the personification of what we might today call dark matter, or cosmic energy, invisible but present. And it was from these waters that Atum emerged, the first being with consciousness and will. Atum is perhaps the most intriguing among the forgotten gods. He was not born, he created himself. The texts say Atum formed himself alone in the chaos, and this makes him one of the first recorded ideas of a self-sufficient deity. He represents the point of origin, and according to the Heliopolis cosmogony, Atum generated the first elements of the world: the air, Shu, and the moisture, Tefnut. And how did he create them? By the force of his thought, or in some versions through a solitary act of masturbation or spitting, symbolizing the generation of life from within himself. Some scholars believe that Atum was the most primitive solar representation, even before Ra gained prominence as the sun god. His name comes from the root Tm, which means complete, reinforcing the idea that he was the totality before everything was divided. This detail, often censored in modern versions of the myths, shows how the Egyptians saw creation as something visceral, almost physical, even among the gods. It was chaos giving birth to order. Shu and Tefnut were the first children of Atum. Shu represented the dry air and the space between the sky and the earth. Tefnut, the moisture, the primordial mist. Together, they created the duality necessary for the world to exist: space and substance. Shu was also associated with light and order, while Tefnut could be invoked during periods of drought, as her moisture was vital for the agricultural cycles. The separation of sky and earth performed by Shu symbolizes the organization of the cosmos, with the earth, Geb, being held down so that life could prosper. It was with them that order began to take shape. They gave birth to Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky, and thus the first divine family was born, which centuries later would give rise to Osiris, Isis, and Seth. But these four, Shu, Tefnut, Geb, and Nut, form a lineage that is almost erased in modern religions. They were the backbone of early Egyptian theology. Over the centuries, the worship of these gods gave way to more human deities with stories of love, betrayal, and revenge, narratives that were easier to understand and to control. Osiris and Isis began to dominate the temples, and the primordial gods, they were reduced to philosophical metaphors or forgotten between the lines of the funerary texts. But why erase them? Perhaps because they represented forces far greater than kings and priests could control, or perhaps because their cults held secrets that were too ancient.